The grand meeting hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with fear. Hundreds of different alien species filled the circular chamber, their worried whispers echoing off the crystal walls. At the center table, Council Leader Blue sat with his forearms trembling as he watched the holographic display. The red dots on the map kept spreading. Each dot represented a part of the spaceborne swarm that had already destroyed 3 solar systems. The creatures, whatever they were, moved through space like a flood of locusts, consuming everything in their path. "Our best warships failed," said Council Member Green, his thin fingers tapping nervously on the table. "The Bright Fleet's energy weapons didn't even slow them down. These creatures just absorb the energy and grow stronger." Blue looked around the room at the gathered representatives. Some of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy sat here, with technology that could reshape planets. Yet none of their weapons worked against this threat. "The swarm will reach the core worlds in 30 days, said Admiral White, her crystal-like body reflecting the red emergency lights. "We've lost contact with every outpost in their path." In the back of the room, Council Member Gray stood up slowly. He was old, even by his species standards, and rarely spoke at meetings. There might be one option left. The room fell silent. Gray was known for suggesting unusual solutions, but they often worked. "We could hire a Deathworlder," he said. Gasps filled the room. Several council members backed away from Gray as if he had suggested letting loose a virus. Others started shouting protests. Silence. Blue's voice boomed through the chamber. He turned to Gray. "Explain." Gray walked to the center of the room, his steps careful and measured. "We've all heard stories about the humans. Yes, they're dangerous. Yes, they evolved on a planet that should have killed them. But that's exactly why we need them." He waved his hand, and the hologram changed to show Earth. Their planet has higher gravity than most. Their bodies can handle extreme pressures. They've evolved fighting predators that would give our strongest warriors nightmares. And most importantly, he paused for effect, they think differently than us. Admiral White's crystalline form sparkled with doubt. "Different how?" "When we face a problem, we use our most advanced technology. The humans, they look for simple solutions. Solutions we might consider primitive. But sometimes primitive works when advanced fails." Blue rubbed his chin with his lower right hand. "Do you know any human warriors we could trust?" Gray nodded. "There's a human contractor who's helped with some difficult situations in the outer systems. Captain Jack Stone. He has a small ship and a reputation for solving impossible problems." "A single ship?" Green laughed. "Against a swarm that destroyed our entire fleet. Let's hear what the human has to say." Blue decided. "We've tried everything else. Send the call." 3 hours later, a battered-looking ship dropped out of hyperspace near the council station. It was small, barely bigger than a cargo runner, and looked like it had been patched together from spare parts. The name Lucky Break was painted on its side in human letters. In the docking bay, council guards stood ready as the ship's airlock hissed open. Captain Jack Stone walked out, and several council members stepped back in shock. He was tall by human standards, but massive compared to most council races. His body looked solid, built for survival, and he moved with a predator's grace that made the guards nervous. Stone wore simple black clothes and carried no visible weapons, but everyone in the room could sense the danger he represented. This was a creature evolved to survive on a world that would kill most species in minutes. "I hear you have a problem," Stone said, his voice surprisingly gentle for his size. He looked at the holograms showing the swarm's destruction. Instead of fear, his eyes showed interest. "Tell me everything." Blue started explaining the situation, but stopped when he noticed something strange. Stone was smiling. "What's amusing about this crisis?" Blue demanded. "Those movement patterns," Stone said, pointing at the swarm's path. "I've seen something similar before. In Earth's oceans." He turned to face the council. "You've been fighting these things like they're ships or soldiers. but they're moving like a school of deep-sea predators. His smile grew wider. And on Earth, we've been dealing with dangerous sea creatures for thousands of years. The council members looked at each other, confused but hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, this dangerous human had the solution they needed. The council's main control room fell silent as Stone walked around the three-dimensional display of the swarm. His heavy boots made soft sounds on the polished floor, and more than a few alien observers noticed how easily he moved despite the station's artificial gravity being set to standard council levels, much lighter than Earth's pull. "Show me the footage of your fleet's attack again," Stone said, his eyes fixed on the hologram. Admiral White gestured with her crystalline arms, and the scene played out once more. The Council's most advanced ships, sleek and beautiful, fired streams of energy weapons at the swarm. But instead of destroying the space creatures, the beams seemed to make them glow brighter. Some even appeared to grow larger after absorbing the attacks. "Stop." Stone pointed at one of the larger creatures. "Freeze and zoom in." The image expanded, showing a beast that looked like a cross between a whale and a manta ray, but covered in what appeared to be metallic scales. It was massive, nearly the size of a small destroyer. "Interesting," Stone muttered. He pulled out a simple paper notebook, an action that made several tech-focused council members gasp, and started sketching. The way they move in formation, the feeding patterns, the energy absorption. It all makes sense now. "What makes sense?" Blue asked, all four of his arms crossed in frustration. "We've had our best scientists studying these creatures for weeks." Stone held up his rough sketch. Despite its simplicity, he had captured the creature's key features remarkably well. On Earth, we have deep-sea creatures called anglerfish. They live where sunlight never reaches, in pressures that would crush most of your ships. Some of them can absorb and redirect bioluminescent energy. He pointed to the swarm creature's scales. "These aren't armor. They're energy-converting organs, like solar panels, but much more advanced." Admiral White's crystalline form flickered with interest. "That explains why our weapons failed. But how does this help us?" Stone walked closer to the hologram, studying the swarm's movement patterns. "You're fighting them like they're an enemy fleet, but they're predators, following instincts millions of years old. Look at their formation." He waved his hand through the hologram, tracing the swarm's path. "They're hunting, using the same patterns that fish use in Earth's oceans. When they encounter resistance," he pointed to a battle scene, "they scatter and regroup, just like a school of tuna avoiding a shark." Green, the Council's chief scientist, leaned forward. "You mean these space-dwelling creatures behave like your Earth fish?" "Similar enough that we can predict their movements," Stone said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something that made several council members step back, a simple metal fishing lure that glinted in the room's light. "Sometimes the oldest solutions work best." "You can't be suggesting," Blue started, but Stone cut him off. "Your energy weapons don't work because these creatures evolved to feed on energy. Your ships are too sophisticated, too reliant on power-based weapons." He grinned. "But humans, we spent thousands of years catching dangerous sea creatures using nothing but ropes and nets." Stone walked to his ship's data terminal and pulled up some files. The screen filled with images of Earth's commercial fishing operations. Huge nets, long lines, complex but decidedly low-tech trap systems. "We need to stop thinking like space admirals and start thinking like fishermen," he said. "I'll need to make some calls. I know a deep-sea mining specialist who can help us modify some equipment. And I want a biologist who specializes in predator behavior." Admiral White's crystalline form pulsed with doubt. "You want to fight space monsters with fishing nets?" "Not exactly," Stone said, his eyes twinkling with the challenge ahead. "But the principles are the same. These creatures might be spaceborne, but they're still following basic hunting and feeding instincts. We can use that against them." He turned to Blue. "Your weapons failed because you tried to overpower them. We need to outsmart them instead." And trust me, when it comes to catching dangerous creatures, humans have more experience than anyone." The council members looked at each other uncertainly. Their most advanced weapons had failed, and now their best hope was a human with what seemed like primitive ideas. But as they watched Stone confidently planning his strategy, they remembered why Deathworlders had such a fearsome reputation. Sometimes the most dangerous predator wasn't the one with the most advanced weapons. It was the one who could outthink its prey. 2 days after Stone's first meeting with the council, 3 more human ships arrived at the station. They weren't military vessels or fancy diplomatic craft. They were work ships, heavy with tools and equipment. The aliens watching their arrival noticed how the ship's designs favored function over beauty, much like their crews. Stone stood in the docking bay, greeting each human as they stepped out. Sam walked out first, still wearing deep-sea mining gear, like she'd just stepped off an ocean rig. Her weathered face broke into a grin when she saw Stone. "When you said you needed help with a fishing problem, I didn't think you meant in space," she said, punching Stone's shoulder playfully. Even this friendly gesture made nearby council guards flinch. They weren't used to seeing species that could withstand such casual physical contact. Alex came next, carrying dozens of data tablets and looking excited. The biologist had spent years studying Earth's most dangerous ocean predators. "I brought all my research on deep-sea hunting patterns," he said. "If these space creatures really act like ocean predators, we might have a chance." Last came Morgan, pulling a massive tool case. The weapons engineer had made a name for herself by turning mining equipment into defensive systems. "Got your message about needing modified nets," she said. "I've got some ideas that might work." Stone led his team to the council's main planning room. The alien leaders watched nervously as the humans spread out their seemingly primitive tools and papers across the high-tech planning table. Sam pulled out actual rope and started tying knots, while Morgan sketched designs on paper instead of using the holographic systems. "Here's what we know," Stone began, pointing to the swarm's movement patterns. "These creatures hunt in 3-dimensional space, just like deep-sea predators on Earth. They follow energy sources like fish follow food." Sam held up a piece of rope. "On Earth, when we need to catch something big and dangerous in the ocean, we don't try to kill it with fancy weapons. We use its own strength against it." "Exactly," Alex added, pulling up footage of Earth whales hunting. "Look at how similar their hunting patterns are to the swarm. They're not mindless. They're coordinated predators. But that means they have predictable behaviors we can exploit." Morgan spread out her designs. "I can modify our deep-sea mining nets with energy-resistant materials. We'll make them huge, bigger than anything we've used on Earth. The basic principle is the same, but we'll need to adjust for zero gravity and space conditions." Admiral White's crystalline form flickered with doubt. "You want to catch space monsters with nets." "Not just nets," Stone explained. "We're going to build the biggest fishing trap ever made." He turned to Sam. "How long would it take to modify some mining ships?" Sam thought for a moment. "With council resources, maybe 3 days. We'll need to strip them down, reinforce the hulls, and install the net launchers. The nets will need to be smart," Morgan added. "Reactive metals, adjustable tensions, and some surprises I've been working on. These aren't your ancient fishing nets. They're just based on the same principles." Blue raised all 4 hands in frustration. "This is your plan. Using modified mining equipment against the most dangerous threat we've ever faced." Stone smiled. "Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best. Your energy weapons didn't work because you tried to overpower them. We're going to trap them instead." He pointed to Alex's data. "These creatures might be spaceborne, but they still follow basic predator instincts. That's their weakness." The council members watched as the humans continued planning, speaking in their quick, excited way. They pointed at charts, argued over designs, and tested rope strengths, all while discussing how to catch creatures that had destroyed advanced alien fleets. "One more thing," Stone added, his face turning serious. We'll need volunteers to pilot the modified ships. It'll be dangerous. We'll have to get close to the swarm." "Don't worry about that," Sam said with a grin. "I called some friends. We've got 20 deep-sea miners ready to help. They say space fishing sounds like fun." The aliens in the room stared in shock. Humans really were different. They called this dangerous mission fun. As the team continued working, Blue leaned over to Gray. "Are you sure about this?" Gray watched the humans work, noting their confidence and practical approach. "When facing doom," he said quietly, "sometimes you need people crazy enough to try the impossible." The humans, focused on their work, didn't hear him. They were too busy planning how to catch space monsters with glorified fishing nets. The Council's main shipyard had never seen anything like it. Where once pristine mining vessels sat in neat rows, now stood what the aliens could only describe as monsters. Sam's team had stripped down 20 ships, rebuilding them with reinforced hulls and massive mechanical arms designed to handle the space nets. "Careful with that launcher," Sam shouted, her voice carrying across the shipyard as workers installed the massive net launching systems. She stood on top of one of the modified ships, covered in grease and wearing an environment suit that had seen better days. "These need to fire perfectly the first time." Inside the main ship, Morgan worked on the control systems. She'd replaced the standard mining controls with something that looked more like old Earth fishing equipment, but with some serious upgrades. "Look at this," she said as Stone entered the bridge. She pulled a lever, and holographic displays showed the net systems. "We've added smart metals to the nets. They can change shape and strength based on what they catch. Plus, we got some surprises for our big fish friends." Stone nodded, watching as alien technicians stared in confusion at the mixture of high-tech and seemingly primitive equipment. "How are the nets holding up against the energy tests?" "Better than expected," Morgan grinned. "The material we developed absorbs and redirects energy, kind of like the creatures themselves. The more they fight, the stronger the nets get." In another part of the shipyard, Alex had set up what he called the behavior lab. Massive screens showed simulations of the swarm's movements, alongside footage of Earth's deep-sea predators. He pointed excitedly at the patterns as council scientists gathered around. "See here," he said, highlighting a particular movement. "When threatened, both the space creatures and Earth's shark schools show the same escape patterns. We can use this to predict where they'll go." Admiral White floated into the lab, her crystalline form reflecting the screen lights. "Your predictions seem primitive compared to our battle computers." Alex laughed. "Sometimes primitive works better. Your computers try to predict them like warships. We're predicting them like animals. Big difference." Outside, the work continued day and night. Humans walked around in radiation zones that made aliens nervous, carried heavy equipment in high-gravity areas with ease, and worked tirelessly despite conditions that would exhaust most species. "They really are Deathworlders," one alien technician whispered to another, watching Sam lift a piece of equipment that should have needed a power loader. "Look how they ignore the danger warnings." The humans had brought their own food and coffee. Lots of coffee. The aliens watched in fascination as the humans consumed the dark liquid and worked even harder. They couldn't understand how a species could willingly drink stimulants and consider it normal. Stone stood in the command center, reviewing the final preparations with Blue and Gray. "The nets are ready. The ships are modified. Now we need to test everything." "Test?" Blue asked, his forearms moving nervously. "We don't have time for tests. The swarm is only 15 days away from the core worlds." "We make time," Stone said firmly. "On Earth, no fishing crew goes after dangerous prey without testing their equipment. That's how you get killed." He pulled up a map showing a nearby asteroid field. "We'll run full tests tomorrow. Better to find problems now than when we're facing the swarm." Gray nodded slowly. "The human is right. We've tried rushing into battle before. It didn't work." As they talked, Sam's voice came over the comm. "Stone, get out here. You need to see this." They rushed to the shipyard's main bay. There, floating in a test chamber, was the largest net anyone had ever seen. It sparkled with embedded smart metal strands, and its pattern was unlike anything the aliens had encountered. "It's beautiful," Admiral White said, surprising herself. Sam beamed with pride. "Wait until you see what it can do." Morgan, hit it. Morgan pressed a button, and electricity coursed through the net. Instead of just conducting the energy, the net seemed to come alive, moving and shifting like a living thing. "The net doesn't just catch," Morgan explained. "It adapts. The more energy the creatures put out, the stronger it gets. We're using their own strength against them." Stone smiled as he watched the aliens' amazed reactions. Sometimes the best solutions weren't about having the most advanced technology. Sometimes they came from thousands of years of catching dangerous things on a death world called Earth. "Tomorrow we test," he said. "Then we go fishing." The asteroid field looked peaceful in the dark of space. 20 modified ships moved into position, their crews ready for the test run. In the lead ship, Stone watched as Sam finished the final equipment checks. "All nets showing green," Sam reported, her hands moving across the modified controls. "Morgan's new sensors are picking up something interesting, though. Got a small group of the creatures about 3 light minutes from here." Stone leaned forward. This wasn't part of the plan. They were supposed to just test the equipment today, not face actual targets. "How many?" "5 of them. Looks like scouts." Alex studied his readings. "They're following the same patterns we predicted, moving just like a hunting pack." Stone thought for a moment. A real-world test would be better than any practice run. "All ships, new plan. We're going to catch ourselves some live samples." The Council escort ships, which had been watching from a safe distance, immediately protested. Admiral White's voice crackled over the comm. "This is not the approved test plan. You must return tow." Stone clicked off the comm. "Sorry, Admiral. Bad connection." He turned to his crew. "Sam, you ready to try out your new toys?" Sam's grin was all the answer he needed. "Been ready my whole life to go space fishing." The modified ships moved silently through the asteroid field. Their hulls, now painted in dark colors, blended with the shadows of the rocks. Alex watched the scout creatures on his screens, calling out their movements. "Just like bluefin tuna," he said excitedly. "They're hunting in a search pattern, looking for energy sources to feed on." Morgan worked at her station, adjusting the net settings. "I've tuned the smart metal to match their energy signature. They shouldn't see it coming." Stone keyed the secure channel to the other ships. "Remember the plan. Just like catching sharks, we make them come to us." The human ships moved into a wide circle, hiding behind larger asteroids. Sam activated a small energy pulse, just enough to look like wounded prey. The space creatures immediately changed course. "They took the bait," Alex whispered. "They're moving exactly like we predicted." The creatures were beautiful in a terrifying way. Their huge bodies glided through space, metallic scales shifting colors as they moved. They were heading straight for the trap. "Now," Stone commanded. 20 nets launched simultaneously. They unfolded in space like giant spider webs, their smart metal strands glowing faintly. The creatures tried to scatter, but the humans had predicted their escape route, just like bottlenose dolphins hunting. Alex shouted, "Port side, they're going tow." Already on it, Sam cut in, adjusting their ship's position. The net shifted, herding the creatures exactly where they wanted them. The council ships watched in amazement as the humans executed their plan. The creatures tried to blast their way free with energy bursts, but the nets only grew stronger, absorbing and redirecting the power. 4 of the creatures were quickly caught, but the largest one was putting up a fight. It charged straight at Stone's ship, its massive body glowing with gathered energy. "Hard to port," Stone ordered. The ship spun in a way that would have knocked out most alien crews, but the humans were used to high-G maneuvers. They'd grown up on a heavy world, after all. The creature shot past them, But Sam was ready. She triggered the backup net, catching it in a perfect snare. "Got you, you big beauty." The creature thrashed and pulsed with energy. But the more it fought, the tighter the smart metal nets became. Finally, it went still, trapped but unhurt. "Sample secured," Morgan reported, checking her readings. The nets holding perfectly. Energy containment at 100%. Stone opened the comm channel to the council ships. Admiral White's crystal form was flickering with what might have been shock. How did you do that?" "Simple," Stone replied. "We didn't try to kill them. We just had to understand how they think, how they move. They may be space creatures, but they're still predators. And humans." He smiled. "We've been dealing with predators since before we had spears." The captured creatures floated in their nets, their metallic scales reflecting the starlight. The humans had done what the most advanced fleet couldn't. They'd caught the uncatchable. "Send word to the council," Stone said. "Tell them the test was successful, and tell them we're ready for the main swarm." He looked at the captured creatures. Time to go fishing for real. The main swarm filled the view screens like a living storm of metal and light. Thousands of the space creatures moved as one massive group, their bodies glowing with absorbed energy. Stone stood on his ship's bridge, watching as his fleet of 20 modified vessels moved into position. "That's a lot of fish," Sam said, her hand steady on the controls despite the overwhelming sight ahead of them. "Biggest school I've ever seen, space or ocean." Alex studied his readings with intense focus. "The swarm's moving just like we predicted. Look at the pattern. The bigger ones are hurting the smaller ones, directing them toward energy-rich targets." Morgan's voice came over the comm from her position in the engineering section. "All nets charged and ready. Smart metal responding perfectly. We've got enough power to catch a small moon." Stone opened the channel to all ships. "Remember your training. We're not here to fight them. We're here to catch them, just like we practiced. These might be bigger fish, but they're still fish." The Council's emergency fleet hung back at a safe distance, their advanced warships ready to help but unsure how. Admiral White's voice crackled through the comm. "The swarm will reach the outer colonies in less than an hour. Whatever you're going to do, Stone, do it now." Stone smiled. "Time to cast our nets. All ships, execute pattern deep blue." The 20 human ships split into groups of 4, each taking position around the massive swarm. They looked tiny compared to both the Council warships and the space creatures, but size wasn't everything. Releasing the first lure, Sam announced, activating a series of energy beacons. The devices pulsed with carefully calculated frequencies, designed to attract the creature's attention. The swarm responded immediately. Just like hungry tuna chasing baitfish, large groups of creatures broke away from the main body, rushing toward what they thought was easy prey. "They're taking the bait," Alex shouted excitedly. Primary groups moving exactly as predicted. "All ships, deploy primary nets," Stone ordered. 20 massive nets launched simultaneously, unfolding in space like giant, glittering webs. The smart metal strands adjusted automatically, responding to the creature's movements. The first wave of space creatures flew straight into the trap. "First catch secured," Sam reported, moving to Phase 2. The battle, if you could call it that, was unlike anything the watching Council fleet had ever seen. Instead of firing weapons, the human ships danced through space in complex patterns. They used the asteroids like coral reefs, hiding behind them to surprise groups of creatures. Every movement was calculated, based on thousands of years of hunting experience. When the creatures tried to blast their way free with energy bursts, the nets only grew stronger. When they attempted to scatter, the humans herded them like experienced shepherds. It was a ballet of predator and prey. But for once, the humans weren't the predators. They were the clever hunters outsmarting a dangerous catch. "Watch the big one," Stone called out as an enormous creature, easily twice the size of the others, charged toward one of their ships. The human vessel didn't try to fight it. Instead, it rolled in a high-G maneuver that would have knocked out most alien crews, letting the creature's momentum carry it straight into the largest net they had. "Got it," Morgan cheered. "The Queen. We've caught their leader." The effect on the swarm was immediate. Without their Queen's guidance, the remaining creatures fell into confusion. The humans pressed their advantage, launching net after net, herding and catching the creatures in groups. Admiral White's crystalline form pulsed with astonishment as she watched from her command ship. They're actually doing it. They're catching them all. Hour after hour, the human ships worked with tireless efficiency. They ignored radiation warnings, pushed through high-G maneuvers, and kept working long past when most species would have needed rest. This was what humans were built for, enduring harsh conditions while getting the job done. Finally, Stone looked at his displays with satisfaction. The last group of creatures was secured, trapped in nets that glowed with contained energy. Where once there had been a deadly swarm, now there were only captured creatures, their metallic scales reflecting the starlight. "All ships report," Stone called out. "How's our catch looking?" Sam's proud voice came back. "Better than any fishing trip I've ever been on, Captain. We got them all." The Council fleet erupted in cheers and celebrations. The human ships, their hulls scratched and their crews exhausted, formed up in a victory formation. They had saved the core worlds with nothing more than modified fishing nets and the determination that made humans famous across the galaxy. Stone opened a channel to Admiral White. "Admiral, you might want to call the Council. Tell them we're going to need a really big fish tank." 1 month after the great space fishing expedition, the Council's main chamber looked very different. Where fear once filled the room, now excitement buzzed through the air. Alien scientists crowded around massive containment tanks that held some of the captured creatures, studying them with wonder instead of terror. Stone stood before the Council, his team beside him. They looked out of place in their simple work clothes among the elegant alien leaders, but nobody cared about that anymore. They had earned their right to stand there. "The creatures are actually peaceful when they're not starving," Alex explained, pointing to the largest tank where the Queen floated gracefully. "They were just following their instincts, searching for energy to survive. Now that we're feeding them controlled amounts of power, they're more like space whales than monsters." Sam nodded, adding, "We've already set up 3 farming stations in uninhabited systems. The creatures can feed on the energy from dying stars without threatening populated worlds." Blue raised all 4 of his hands for silence as the chamber buzzed with excited conversations. "Captain Stone and his team have done more than save our worlds," he announced. "They've shown us that sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones." Morgan stepped forward, holding up a David tablet. "We've had requests from 15 different worlds wanting to learn our space fishing techniques. Turns out there are a lot of energy-based creatures out there that need handling." "Which brings us to our proposal," Stone said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "We want to start a new company. We're calling it Deathworlder Solutions Incorporated." Admiral White's crystalline form sparkled with interest. "What exactly would this company do?" "What humans do best," Stone smiled. "Solve problems that seem impossible by thinking differently. We've already got 50 more deep-sea workers ready to train as space fishermen. People who know how to handle dangerous creatures without killing them." Gray, who had first suggested hiring humans, looked pleased. "And what would you charge for these services?" "Reasonable rates," Sam answered. "Plus, we want to set up training programs, teach other species how to handle similar situations, share what we know about dealing with dangerous creatures." The Council members looked at each other. This was unusual. Most species kept their advanced technologies secret. But here were humans willing to teach others their primitive but effective methods. "There's more," Stone continued. "Alex's research team has found ways to communicate with the Queen creature. Turns out, these beings are intelligent. They just think very differently from us. Kind of like how humans think differently from the Council races. The chamber erupted in surprised murmurs. Blue raised his hands again for quiet. Are you suggesting we could actually talk to them? We already are, Alex said proudly. The Queen has been helping us understand their migration patterns. There are more swarms out there, but now we know how to help them find safe feeding grounds away from populated systems. In other words, Stone summarized, what started as a crisis has become an opportunity. We've got new technology from developing the SmartNets, new knowledge about space-dwelling creatures, and a chance to turn dangerous predators into peaceful neighbors. The Council voted unanimously to approve the new company. As the chamber cleared, Admiral White approached Stone's team. I must admit, she said, her crystalline form glowing softly, when you first suggested catching space monsters with fishing nets, I thought you were crazy. Sometimes crazy works, Sam laughed, especially when it comes from a death world. Stone looked out the chamber's window at the containment tanks where the once terrifying creatures now floated peacefully. You know what's funny? Back on Earth, we used to be scared of deep-sea creatures. Now we're teaching the galaxy how to fish in space. Speaking of teaching, Morgan added, checking her tablet, we've got our first class of alien students arriving tomorrow. Going to be interesting teaching them how to think like Deathworlders. As the team walked out of the chamber, discussing plans for their new company, Blue turned to Gray. You were right about hiring them, Blue admitted. Who would have thought that the solution to our most advanced problem would come from such simple methods? Gray watched the humans leave, noting how they moved with the easy confidence of a species used to overcoming impossible odds. That's the thing about humans, he said wisely. They remind us that advanced doesn't always mean better. Sometimes, you just need to think differently. He smiled. And when you're staring at doom, there's nobody better to call than a Deathworlder.